Okay friends, it's time to get started on our AC system. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is have your AC system refrigerant serviced by a professional. Generally it's going to be done with a machine that looks a little like this. The two ports that they're going to use to service the AC system, one is right here. The other one's located on the other side, all the way over here. Now once your refrigerant is safely recycled, the next thing we're going to do is make our way to the negative battery terminal. We'll use an 8mm to go ahead and loosen this. Once you have it loose enough, go ahead and remove that from the battery. Set that aside. Now the next thing I like to do is make my way right up here, and we're going to go ahead and remove this plastic plate. For that, you're going to find that you have three 7mm headed bolts. Go ahead and remove all three, and then the plastic protective plate. Now we're going to start removing this hose right here. We'll start by taking this off using a trim tool. Now to go ahead and get this out of here, you're going to find two clamps. There's one on the far end, closest to the throttle body. We'll use an 8mm or a flathead to loosen this only enough that we can remove it. Go ahead and follow that all the way down to the far end, close to your mass airflow sensor. There's one more clamp, 8mm or flathead. Now we can grab onto this, we're going to give it a little wiggle and carefully remove it from the throttle body. As I pulled it away, you'll notice that this plastic hose slid right out of here. That's fine. Let's go ahead and grab onto this, give it a twist. Once you have it off of there, just give it a close inspection. Make sure it's not worn, torn, or damaged in any way. Now the next thing we want to do is start removing the serpentine belt from the area. I'll make my way down underneath the alternator. On the passenger side, you're going to find the tensioner. Now I'm just going to use a 3/8 drive ratchet for this. You can also use a serpentine belt tool. Go ahead and turn that counterclockwise to release the belt tension. Now I'm going to slide it off of the idler pulley. There we are. I'll get my tool out of there. Now let's take the belt from the driver's side where the AC compressor is and slide it all the way over towards the passenger side. While you have it off, just go ahead and take a peek at it. If you see a whole bunch of cracks along where the ribs are or damage in any way, now's the perfect time to go ahead and replace the belt. Otherwise, just go ahead and set that aside so it's safe. Now that we have the belt off, the next thing we want to do is start removing the power steering reservoir. To do that, you're going to want to make sure that you evacuate any of the fluid that's in the system. I'll go ahead and open this. Now you're going to want to have a suction device of some sort. Let's go ahead and draw out any of the fluid that's in there. We'll recycle that properly, and we'll replace it with brand new fluid in the end. Now, of course, we did try taking the fluid out of here, but there might still be a little bit left in the system, so just make sure you put a collection bucket under the area. Now, once you have that drained, I'm just going to go ahead and put the cover back on here to protect it from any debris making its way in. Now let's make our way down along the driver's side of the reservoir, and you're going to find a hose that leads to the bottom of it. There's a clamp holding it in place. Go ahead and squeeze that clamp, slide it down, remove the hose from the reservoir. Now I'll use my pry bar. I'm going to carefully try to press this down without damaging the hose or the power steering reservoir. Now let's take out our two 10mm headed bolts that hold this in place. Now there is one more hose on this, but we don't have to remove that one. We'll just go ahead and grab onto this, start lifting it up, and then we're going to try to slide it out of the way. Now we'll remove the mounting bracket for that by removing these two 8mm headed bolts. Inspect your bracket, set it aside. Now the next thing we're going to do is start removing the lines from the back of the AC compressor. Now if you were to look in my mirror right back here, you're going to be able to see where I'm pointing to. There's a 10mm headed bolt that holds the lines to the back of the compressor. Go ahead and safely remove that bolt. Also, keep in mind, as we remove this line, there's the possibility there could still be pressure in the system. Go ahead and grab onto that line, give it a little wiggle, trying to break it free from the compressor. Now that we have the lines off there, have a look along the back side of that. You're going to find that you have a wiring harness that presses directly into it. We're just gonna go ahead and carefully pry that out of there. Now the next thing we're gonna wanna do is gain access through the driver's side wheel well. To get a little bit more access in that area, I'll just continue on with a jack on the frame. I'm gonna carefully jack this up, and then I make sure I secure it with a jack stand. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is safely raise and support the driver's side of the vehicle. What I want to do is get some gap in between this area so I can reach right in and access the mounting bolts and hardware from in this area. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the wheel so the camera can see inside there. You do not necessarily need to remove the wheel. We're going to move along to removing our center cover. If you were to feel along it, you're going to find an area that you can carefully get in between with a small pry bar. Once you have that cover off of there, continue on to removing all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. The next thing we're going to do is use a pick. We're going to follow the wiring all the way over here. Carefully use the pick to get underneath the little ear here and then separate it. Once you have it apart, go ahead and give it a quick inspection. If you see any funny colors, it's probably corrosion, and that would need to be dealt with. This one looks fine, so I'll go ahead and set it aside. Once you have that off of there, continue on to your 2 mounting bolts. You'll find the forward one has a stud on it. Just keep that in mind for the installation process. Let's continue on by removing our 2 nuts that you're going to find here. There's a 13mm and then another 13 over here. Once we have each of those out, we're also going to continue on by removing the studs. The stud will come right on through up into this area. Once you have the nut off of there, continue on with a 5mm socket or wrench. We're going to come right down here to the very tip of the stud and just start turning that counterclockwise until it fully unscrews from its bracket. Now that we have that first stud out of there, let's continue on to the other one. I'm going to go ahead and start loosening this. As I loosen it, you want to be very careful because there's going to be nothing holding this compressor in place. I've got that nut loose now. I'll just continue on with my 5mm socket. Remove the stud from here. Give this a little wiggle, get that stud right out of there. Now we're going to carefully grab onto the compressor and pull it out through the top. There's our compressor. Now that we have the compressor out of there, let's have a look at the lines that go along the back side. Commonly, you might happen to find that the gasket that's supposed to be on the back of the compressor sticks to the line. If that's the case, just go ahead and take it right off of there. We'll dispose of that properly. Now I'm just going to reach down here and I'll wipe down the lines. Essentially, I want to make sure there's no dirt or debris in this area. Now before we go ahead and put our new compressor into the vehicle, you're going to find with your kit, it came with some of these dowels. You want to make sure you match up your original compressor with the new one, and you'll see exactly where those dowels need to go. We'll just go ahead and line this up, and then we'll gently tap it into place. Let's carefully take that new compressor, and we're going to slide it into place. We'll line up our dowels with where they belong. Should slide right in. Now, once you have it lined up, go ahead and start putting in your mounting bolts. We'll start each of these top ones in a couple threads. Now I'm going to bottom out both of my top studs. Now that I have that one bottomed out, I'm going to continue on with my mounting nut here, essentially just so I can hold the compressor still while I continue with the rest. Now we can start getting this other stud in here. Now that I have that stud nice and tight as well, I'll continue bottoming out this mounting nut. Now let's pause on these. We're going to continue down along the bottom. Now we can make our way back into the wheel well. We'll start putting in our 2 mounting bolts. As you remember, the one that has the stud is towards the front. Start that in by hand, a few good threads here. Put on the rearward bolt. Now we can snug these up and we'll torque all the areas that hold the compressor to the bracket to manufacturer's specifications. Now we're going to torque each of these to 18 foot-pounds. Let's reconnect our connector here. Goes right along the front, near where the pulley is. Press it in, listen for a click. Make sure you give it a tug. You want to make sure that's secure. Now we're just going to go ahead and take the wires that we removed from the compressor and slide them right in down along the bottom corner here. Just press it in, give that a tug, make sure it's secure. You don't want that hanging down, potentially getting caught or damaged on something. Now, luckily for us, we can make our way to the top nuts as well from under here. Just go ahead and get my socket on there. We'll torque each of these to 18 foot-pounds as well. Let's get our wheel on here. Now we're just going to go ahead and start on all 5 of our lug nuts. We'll bottom these out, get the wheel safely back down on the ground, and then we'll torque each of the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely on the ground, let's continue torquing these in a crisscross manner. Now, if you had a center cover, go ahead and put that on now. Looking at the back, you can tell there's an area that protrudes out. You need to line it up with one of the holes for the lug nut. Now let's use our 10mm along the back side of our new compressor. You're going to find a bolt back there. Go ahead and release that and then remove the protective cover. Keep in mind there could be pressure in this area. Now what I set up here is the mirror so you can see the back side of the compressor. It's important to make sure that there is still 2 gaskets, one for each port. If there isn't, you need to go ahead and put some in there. Now I'm going to take a glove finger with some PAG oil and I'm just going to come right around both of those seals. Now that I have that on there, I'll continue on by putting my lines on. After I have the line in place, we'll go ahead and put in our mounting bolt. You can use the brand new bolt that came with your new compressor. We'll go ahead and start this in, bottom it out, and then we're going to torque it to 15 foot-pounds. Now we're going to torque this to 15 foot-pounds. Now once you have that torqued down, let's continue on to our power steering bracket. Line up your bolt holes, start in both of the bolts, and tighten them up. Now let's take our power steering reservoir and we'll slide it onto our power steering hose. Push it on there as far as it can go. After you feel as though you have it on as far as it can go, continue putting the clamp into its original position. Now I'm going to start taking this and I'm going to put it in position on the bracket. Now we're going to line this up, get both of our mounting bolts started, and then we'll snug them up. Now let's fill our power steering system. It's important to make sure you top this off with Mercon ATF. Now I'll get my serpentine belt tool on here, basically a 3/8 drive once again. I'm going to start pressing this belt down so I can press it underneath the idler pulley as I relieve tension. Now I can get my tool out of here. Now the next thing you want to do is pay attention to the belt. There's going to be several pulleys that have ribs, and of course the other side of the belt has ribs as well. They need to fit together perfectly. If it's misaligned like this right here, and you start up the vehicle, it's going to ruin the belt. Now it's time to move along to the receiver dryer. That's this area right here. We're going to start disconnecting it by coming to this line. To get this apart, we're going to grab onto the locking clip, carefully lift it up and off. Give that a close inspection, make sure it's not rotted and weak. Assuming it's good, go ahead and set that aside. Now we're going to need an AC line tool. Looks just like this. I'm going to have that, and I'll slide it right on over. It clips in. Now I'm going to take this, and I'm going to slide it up inside the groove of the line. There's a spring inside that we need to unload. I'll press that up. Once you have it pressed in as far as you can, go ahead and start separating the 2 lines. Now that I have that pressed in, I'll continue by trying to separate this. there's some little gaskets in here that are essentially holding it. As you can tell, the tool is already released. There we are. There's the gaskets that were holding us in place, and inside of this area, there's also a protective spring. Now let's move along to the pressure sensor. Where my index finger is, there's a little tab that I can grab on under and lift it up and away from the sensor. After that, I'll go ahead and pull off the wiring. There's the tab. Just get under there and lift it. Now let's use a 17 millimeter to start unscrewing the sensor. Now let's move along to this area here. You can either use a 7/8 wrench or a 22 millimeter wrench. For the other side, I'm going to continue using an 1 1/16. Now once I have both of these on here, I'm going to continue turning the back wrench counterclockwise here. Go ahead and carefully pull this off. Now to continue separating this, we're going to have to move down to the bracket that holds the receiver dryer in place. For the bracket, I'll use an 8 millimeter socket. Come right down here to the one mounting bolt. Loosen that up. Directly below it, there's a second. The one below it's a little harder to see. Now we can grab the receiver dryer. We're going to give this a little wiggle. We should be able to slide it up and out. Now with the receiver dryer out of there, we're going to continue down to the lower line. You can see it right down there. It has a plastic clip on it. Go ahead and remove that clip, and then we're going to separate the line. Inside there is where your Orifice tube is, which is also considered the filter for your AC system. Now let's grab our AC tool again. We're going to come right down to the rearward aspect of this line. Should slide right on there. There we are. Once you have it slid over the line, continue by pressing it forward into the forward line. Now that I have the tool in there, I'll grab the forward line, start trying to wiggle it around a little bit so I can separate it. Now let's use some long nose pliers. We're going to carefully come inside the tube, open up the pliers, and what we're looking for is that orifice tube in there. Generally, you can just kind of squeeze onto it and then pull it right on out. Now that we have the filter out of the system, let's have a close look at it. Looking at the original, you can see along each of the screens, there's a whole bunch of debris that's clogged up in this area. That could cause a restriction in the AC system and potentially make it so your brand new parts don't function properly. That's why it's important that you go ahead and replace this at the same time. With that said, let's get ready for our installation. Now when we go to put this in, you want to pay attention to right where my index finger is. You can see that there's an arrow. That's the direction that you're going to want to be pressing this into the line. Speaking of putting this into the line, it's important that you make sure you lubricate both of these gaskets with some PAG oil or AC system oil. Just hold that with our pliers, carefully slide it in. Generally, it's a good idea to make sure you have the screens facing up and down. Just go ahead and press that in as far as it can go without breaking it in any way. Now, before we go ahead and put our line back together, let's make sure that we replace our gaskets. You'll notice in the kit, it came with a whole bag full of gaskets, so we're going to replace them as needed. For this line, there's going to be 3 gaskets on them. We'll remove all 3 and replace all 3. Now that I have all 3 of the gaskets off, I'm going to go ahead and wipe down the area. Now we're going to start replacing all 3 of the gaskets. Now we'll coat these with some PAG oil. Make sure they're well lubricated. Now let's go ahead and reconnect these lines. Just going to line that up, gently press it in. Once you feel as though you have it in there, go ahead and continue pressing. We want to try to press these together, and you want to make sure that it's completely locked. If you can grab this line and pull it right off, like what I can here, it's not situated in there perfectly. It's going to separate on you once you put pressure in the system. Just heard a nice click. I'm going to give that a tug. Trying to separate it, it does not want to separate. That feels good, I can move along. Let's move up to this other line. We'll grab the gasket off of here and replace that as well. Wipe that down. Get ready to install your brand new gasket and slide it right on there. Now I am going to lubricate this with PAG oil, but before I do that, I'll move along to my other AC line. Remove all of the gaskets, match them up, and replace them with brand new ones. Now we can lubricate everything with our PAG oil. Let's grab our receiver dryer. Come over here. Pull off your protective covers, set those aside. Now we can take this and we're going to start sliding into position. We're sliding it down into each of the brackets. And before we go ahead and tighten that, we're going to move along to this area here. We want to make sure that the line matches up with the corresponding hole here. Once it does, go ahead and take your mounting nut and start it on there by hand. You need to make sure that this does turn on by hand at least a few threads. That way there you know you're not cross-threading it on. Now let's take our 22mm wrench and our 1/16" wrench. We'll put the 22 on the receiver dryer and we'll use the 1/16" to turn our mounting nut. Right there it feels as though it bottomed out. I'm just going to go ahead and take it a little bit further. Make sure that's nice and snug. Let's take our other AC line. We'll put it into the receiver dryer port. You know what to do. Press it in as far as you can. Listen for a click. Give it a tug. There's a click. Try to pull it apart. That's nice and tight. Now we can start putting in our bracket screws. I'm going to come down to my lower bracket with some long pliers and gently squeeze it together. I'll attempt to line up my mounting holes and then put in my mounting bolt. All right, that one's nice and tight. Now I'll do the same to the top bracket. Okay, that one's nice and tight as well. Let's remove this protective cover. We'll install this on here. Once you bottom it out by hand, continue on with your 17mm wrench. Snug it up. Connect in your wiring harness. Now that we have both of the lines on there and we're sure they're secure, go ahead and lock them in. Now we can insert our air intake system. I'm just going to slide this right on here. Now we'll make our way over to the air filter box. We'll slide that on as far as it can go as well. Once you have both of these areas bottomed out as far as you can, go ahead and tighten your clamp. It's a good idea to use an 8mm socket because it'll grip better than a flathead screwdriver. Now let's insert our tube into the side. The next thing you have is your mass airflow sensor wiring. We're going to make sure we position that into its corresponding hole. Give it a little tug to make sure it's secure. Also, at this point, it's a good idea to double check everything that we happen to have removed. We took this entire thing off. You want to make sure that you tighten the clamps. We had some AC lines off. Double check. You want to make sure you tightened everything. Any little leak will cause an issue with the AC system. Let's get this cover on here. The hardest part's lining up all of your bolt holes, so we'll start those in before we tighten any of them. Let's reconnect our negative battery terminal. Slide that down as far as you can. Use your 8mm to tighten it accordingly. All right, so at this point, we have the AC system put back together. You're going to want to make your way over to a professional AC shop so they can go ahead and recharge this for you. When they do it, they're going to put in the proper amount of oil, and of course, they're going to put in the proper amount of R134A refrigerant. At that point, you can continue on by taking it for a road test and making sure that it blows nice and cold. Thanks for watching.